My name is Ralph Epperson, and Ed's asked me to make some comments today about me and my work, and especially about the Federal Reserve and why I want to abolish it. I'm a U of A graduate at the University of Arizona, and I graduated in many years ago. I won't tell you how many, but I graduated, and after college I went to Los Angeles for a job. First one after college, and I didn't know anything about California politics coming from Arizona, so I joined the Young Republicans. And then when I did, I was asked by a fellow young man that I met named Jim, and he said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I'm here to learn more about California politics." And he said, "No, you're not. You're here to read." And I said, "No, I'm not. I hate to read." He said, "No, read." He gave me a book to read, and I read it. And my research into that field, what he called revisionist history, led me off for 40-some years now. In fact, just now 50 years I've been researching the conspiratorial view of history, which is revisionist history, which means we're being lied to. And that's what I've been doing for my life, adult life. I've got 4 books out on the market, all 2 of them have been published by 7 nations, primarily European, but the Chinese, there's a Chinese publisher in communist China publishing my book, The Unseen Hand, which I thought was very strange, because in that book I tell the reader, anyone, that it was our government that turned China into a communist nation. And I'm surprised that someone, if they took my book and translated it accurately into Chinese, they're going to tell their citizens that it was our government that did it to them. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, I've been researching and studying, and ever since that, it was in 1962, and so I've been very actively involved with selling books, doing lectures, talk shows, seminars, anything I can to get people educated. I'm a teacher. I taught part-time in Oregon, in a community college, and then I've been on the History Channel twice, on 2 documentaries that are still showing. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, one of them was showing again. So that's been helpful. I've been very pleased that I've been getting some sort of publicity out. I don't have any advertising budget, but it's just people want to buy my books through word-of-mouth advertising, and that's what I've been doing for 50 years, educating as much as I can that there's something going on, not only in the United States, but in the world, and my goal is to try to educate people to get us together to stop it. I'm an author, a writer, and a researcher, and this was my first book. I wrote this in 1985, this book, called The Unseen Hand, in which I covered this in far more detail. There's several chapters on the Federal Reserve, on money, inflation, etc., and how Lenin is quoted, told us how to destroy the capitalist system. I would urge you to consider this. This is still being published. This is the year 2012. That's what, 15 plus 12, that's 27 years. The book's still being sold, in fact, I just reprinted it a couple of months ago. You might want to consider this, because in here I defined this back in 1985 and warned the American people that if we allowed the Federal Reserve to keep doing what it's doing, it's going to destroy the capitalist system. And now we're seeing that in America today.
Yeah, that's good. I'll make sure we got that in there.
Yeah, a couple of years ago I put out a DVD. In fact, I just, it's been uploaded onto the internet, and you can go watch it for free. It's called Abolish the Federal Reserve. And you say, well, why do we do that? And that's what we need to talk about, because we've been warned. This is a flyer I've got on the subject that I hand out, or I mail out in my catalog. We've been warned about this before by various presidents and bank officials, etc., that we need to not have a central bank like the Federal Reserve. Let me just read you the quote from President Franklin Roosevelt. He said, the real truth is that a financial element has owned the government ever since President Andrew Jackson, meaning about 100 years. So in other words, if a financial element owns our government, they own it today as well as they did back over 100 years ago, according to Franklin Roosevelt. Abraham Lincoln said this, the money power, he called it the money power, meaning the central banks of the world, prey upon a nation in times of peace and conspire against it in times of adversity. The money power will endeavor to work upon the people until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. Those are only 2 or 3 of about 6 or 7 quotes on there. Let me point one more thing out. I thought it was kind of ironic. I don't know if people have made a connection like this, but there have only been 2 presidents in the history of our nation who have ever issued money without borrowing it from the Federal Reserve or other banks. One was Abraham Lincoln, and the other was John Kennedy. Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, had very little taxing power, so he decided not to borrow the money from the European bankers who visited apparently the White House and said, listen, we'll loan you the money at 36% interest, and he said, Lincoln, I'm not going to do that, so he issued the greenback, which was not borrowed. John Kennedy did it in about 1962 or 63, issued something like $45 million worth of U.S., he called it U.S. banknotes, but it was not borrowed. And it's strange that there are 2 of the presidents who have been assassinated. I wonder if there's some connection between issuing money without borrowing it and getting assassinated. And if I may, just very quickly, in my video I show you this. There's when I was in Detroit, Michigan speaking, the host asked me to go, if I wanted to go to the Ford Museum, and I agreed. I've never been there before. Henry Ford was a great collector. He collected all sorts of things as a record of the past. The industrialized, household appliances primarily, but cars and trains, etc. And you walk in and there's this wooden, like about the size of a closet, with it's 4-sided, of course, and these 2 sides are glass, and then this is wood over there, and that's wood. And inside there, I presume in some sort of a air-controlled environment to keep it from decaying, is the rocking chair that Abraham Lincoln sat in the night he was assassinated in 1865. In fact, you can still see the blood stains, the dried blood stains on the back of the chair. And then you walk around a little while and you end up looking at John Kennedy's car, the one he was seated in when he was assassinated. And I don't know how many people make the connection between the rocking chair and the Cadillac, but I do, because those are the 2 presidents that were assassinated because they dared tackle the money power, as Lincoln called it. I'd like to mention that the idea of a central bank is not a capitalist idea at all. In fact, it's a communist idea. Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism, wrote in 1848 about a central bank. I'm going to put my glasses on and we'll read that. I've got a copy of the Communist Manifesto. There it is. This is the 100th edition, 100th anniversary edition of the Communist Manifesto. And I want to just read, I'll look for it here, about his desire to create a central bank. Because, that's where it is. It's in the 10 planks. Marx said that the proletariat, meaning the working class, will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie. Well, who's the bourgeoisie? It's not the poor. It's not the wealthy, by the way. It's the middle class. So he's going to eliminate the capital from the bourgeoisie. And then he says these measures will, of course, be different in different countries. But he's talking primarily about an industrialized country. And he's going to now list, here you can see 10 planks. And I want to read one of them, which is very pertinent to our discussion of the Federal Reserve. He says, let's see, here it is. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, industrialized countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. And number 5, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Well, we didn't have a central bank until 1913, although there were 2 attempts to create one back in the past before that, which I don't think we'll discuss. We can if later if you want to. But why do we need a central bank? Because if you get control of the money supply, you can cause business cycles like this. So you increase the money supply and then decrease it, and then you can increase the money supply and decrease it. And if you know when you're going to increase it, you can buy low down here and then watch as it goes up like the stock market, and then just before you start reducing the quantity of money, you can actually sell your stock and get out, and then watch as it tumbles and then bring your money back into the marketplace at the low point, and then do it again. And you can magnify your wealth, and that's what Marx was talking about. And the purpose of it is, as he said, is to destroy the middle class. And isn't that what's happening in America today? Exactly. We've got credit, expansion, debt, and then we go through a recession, and we go through another peak and then another valley. And we've had that ever since 1913 when we created the Federal Reserve. I'm contending we need to abolish the Federal Reserve. That's what my flyer's about. Because if I'm right, the Federal Reserve is the major problem in this country, because they're the ones that create these booms and busts like this up and down, and with the support of the Congress and the President in both parties, who seem to approve of all these techniques where you can increase and decrease the quantity of money. There's another thing that we have to consider, and that's a quote from Thomas Jefferson, our third president, way back in the 1700s, 1800s. Here's what he said. Thomas Jefferson tried to warn America even today. It is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes. Now what does that mean? You don't borrow money. If you get a deficit, you pay for it now. You don't borrow money. A principle which, now here's the key, a principle which, if acted upon, would save 1/2 of the wars of the world. Now wait a minute, why? What's the connection between wars and the central bank? Well, we get into a war position and the people don't want to increase their taxes, so we borrow the money and then have to pay it back. That's what the national debt is. We borrowed money from the Federal Reserve, and then they want us to pay it back at interest. Now notice when the candidates are talking about a deficit budget, they don't seem to want to talk about the interest payments. And in my DVD called Abolish the Federal Reserve on the internet, you can watch for free whenever you're ready, I explain about the interest payments. And I used a little example. Let's say they borrowed $1 trillion. It's a lot more than that, but say $1 trillion, say, for a deficit budget. And then they borrow the money from the Federal Reserve. We issue bonds to them. The Federal Reserve has the bonds, and we agree to pay interest on that debt. And I just said, for instance, let's say 10%, and we borrowed the money for 20 years. If you take 20 times 10% of $1 trillion, that's 100 billion. And if you take 20 times 100 billion, that's $2 trillion in interest for a $1 trillion loan. So the Federal Reserve can double their money by loaning us $1 trillion. They get back $2 trillion in interest payments in 10 years, 20 years rather. Isn't that interesting? But the politicians don't talk about that. They just create the debt, and then we have to pay it back at interest. And I don't know what the interest rates are, but this is one of the dangers. Ask your candidates who voted for the deficit increase, the budget to borrow the money from the Federal Reserve. Ask them how much the interest is going to be at times, how long are the bonds going to last, and they might come up with some sort of figure. It's going to cost us like 2 or 3 times what we originally borrowed. Plus, they get the money back. Now, there's one more thing we got to talk about this. The Federal Reserve doesn't loan money they've already got. They create it out of nothing. Now, let's talk about that. When you and I create money and put it into circulation, it's called counterfeiting. And it's illegal. Why? Because it destroys the value of the money that's in circulation. So that's why. It destroys the value of the people that haven't done anything except earn their money. We create paper money, put it into circulation, and the prices go up. And so if it's against the law for us to do it, why is it not against the law for the Federal Reserve to do it? Please explain that. Anybody? Yeah, take a shot at it. I'd love to hear. Write to me and tell me why we do that. Now, it's not called counterfeiting when the Federal Reserve does it. It's called funding the deficit. And they get not only, and then we have to pay it back plus interest payments. And Congress doesn't want to talk about the interest payments. One of the things that's very interesting is that the Federal Reserve is not federal. Oh, now wait a minute, Ralph, it says federal. It does, in fact, on your dollar bill it says Federal Reserve Note, so that's obviously government. No, it's not government. Let me tell you how you can prove this. On my DVD, I give you 2 ways to do it. You can check through your phone book. Oh, well, I don't have a phone book. Well, okay, get a phone book, go to a library. And there's 12 regional branch offices of the Federal Reserve. So if you find out one that's nearby you, find out which one's available to you, which ones you're nearby, and go to that. If you can find, say, like in San Francisco, if you live someplace near, they go to a library. It's got a San Francisco phone book, and you look through the blue pages where the government listings are under F for federal, and you can go down through the listings, the Agriculture Department and wherever, and down where it says F, there's no listing. Oh, obviously, since it's not listed in the blue pages, Federal Reserve doesn't have phones. That's the only conclusion you could draw, because if they did, they'd be listed. Well, they're not listed under the Fs, under the government, under the federal government, in the blue pages of the phone book. Well, why is that? Oh, we said, well, maybe by mistake they put it in the white pages. So you look back, business listings, and you go flip through. Well, here's a line for the Federal Sign Company, and then where the Federal Reserve should be next, or one in front of it, and then Federal Pest Control, then the Federal Reserve, and there's no listing, and then the Federal Sign Company, and so there's 3 names in a row, but this one's missing. So that's where it should be. In fact, it's not missing, it's there. Federal Pest Control, Federal Sign Company, Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Sign Company, and strangely enough, the Federal Reserve is listed in the white pages, just like these 2 privately owned businesses, the Federal Pest Control and the Federal Sign Company, are privately owned. Now, isn't it strange that the Federal Reserve pays no taxes? Wait a minute. It's a private corporation, doesn't pay taxes. Why do they get away with that? Now, I can assure you, in my little example, the Federal Pest Control and the Federal Sign Company do pay taxes, but the Federal Reserve doesn't. Why is that? Well, if you're going to steal the property for the middle class, you've got to have a legitimate way to do that and not pay tax. Why should you pay taxes on theft when you steal from people? Why do you have to pay taxes? So ask your congressman or your senator about that. Why is the Federal Reserve not federal? The second way you can find it is in my DVD. I show you an advertisement that appeared in a computer magazine, and they were looking for programmers. And it starts out with, I think, Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, the regional office. And it says that we're looking for programmers, and many people think that we're part of the government. We're not. We're the bank's bank. Oh, okay, that's good. And so you can go to work for the Federal Reserve, but it's not federal. It's privately owned. And that's 2 ways you can prove it. Check the blue pages in the phone book and get to see the ad in the newspaper. And it was in a magazine advertising for programmers, and there's a mention they're not federal. Now, why is that significant? Because we don't know who owns the Federal Reserve. No, wait a minute. Oh, no, we can find out. No, you can't find out. The government has tried to audit the Federal Reserve for probably 50 or 60 years without success. Why? If it's a government agency, we should be able to look inside and see, but see, it's not. And they say we're not going to reveal who owns our Federal Reserve, and we can't find out. And this is why Ron Paul, running for the presidency, this is, by the way, let's mention that, this is made in April of 2012, this little video. So we now know that Ron Paul's running for the presidency, and he's trying to not only audit the Federal Reserve, but end it. And that's why I would urge you to watch my DVD entitled Abolish the Federal Reserve, because it's not federal. And by the way, join me in a one-man crusade. Please call it what it is, the private Reserve. I think to understand the Federal Reserve, you've got to understand the dictionary definition of inflation. Now, this is not the one you get at college. They've got better examples, but let's just talk about what the dictionary tells you about inflation. Inflation is defined as an increase in the money supply causing prices to rise. Why would prices go up where there's more money? I used an example in my DVD. I said, I live in Tucson, Arizona. Let's just say that some people with helicopters fly over the city and drop out $1 billion worth of new money, 3 o'clock in the morning. So when people wake up, they run outside, they see their lawns covered with money. They grab it all up and then they go to the store and say, boy, I can buy that big TV set I've always wanted. And so they can go to the store and start with bidding with others who found other dollars on the ground. The price for the television set, and the price is $1,000. I'll bid 2,000, 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever it is. And prices are going up because of an increase in the money supply. Now, interestingly enough, when you go to college, they don't teach you that. Why? Why? They tell you that we, the people, cause inflation, not an increase in the money supply. Well, who's responsible for increasing and decreasing the money supply? The Federal Reserve. I've got a book here someplace. Here it is. I'm sitting in the corner of my room. This is a book I got when I was in college called The Federal Reserve Purposes and Functions. And there's not one mention about how they can cause inflation. But the first paragraph says, listen to me read this. It's right there. That paragraph says, and I'm going to quote now, the Federal Reserve itself. This is printed by them. The function of the Federal Reserve is to foster a flow of credit and money. Wait a minute. If they've got the ability to increase and decrease the money supply, they can cause business cycles. But you don't learn that when you go to the universities. Oh, why is that? Okay, now let's read how it works. Here's this is a book written by John Maynard Keynes, the leading economist of the 20th century. Many consider him to be the final authority during those periods. He was an advisor to many of the presidents. I'm sorry, not he was, but John Kenneth Galbraith was, who was a believer in John Maynard Keynes. Let's read from this book entitled The Economic Consequences of the Peace, the End of the Laissez-faire. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's go to page 105. I'll read you the paragraph, and we'll see how you can destroy with money. Money can be used to destroy, yes. Listen to this. Here's what John Maynard Keynes said. Lenin, not John Lenin, this is Nikolai Lenin, the communist leader of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917. So Keynes is now quoting Nikolai Lenin. Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency by a continuing process of inflation. Now wait a minute. He's saying that Lenin could increase the money supply. No. We learned that people, shortages, housewives, business, greedy business. Here's Lenin saying, I'm going to inflate the money supply, and by doing that, let's read what he says. Governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily. And while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. Wait a minute. How could you benefit by inflation? Well, you don't invest your money in money. You invest in things that will increase in a period of inflation. So you get, they don't do that. Remember what Marx said, we're going to use the poor people to attack the profits, the money of the bourgeoisie, the middle class. Then John Maynard Keynes says, the second paragraph, Lenin was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction and does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Now, if you listen to what I just said, you're able to diagnose how you can use money to destroy. And sure enough, Lenin did exactly that. When he took over the government of the Russian government, he increased the money supply 19,000 times in 3 years. What would that do to the value of money? You needed a basket to buy an egg, a basket of money. Why? Because you're out to destroy the capitalist system to replace it with the communist system, and it worked. So there we got it. John Maynard, oh, by the way, then, John Maynard Keynes also wants to end the laissez-faire it's pronounced, laissez-faire capitalist system. Why? Why would he want to do that? Because John Maynard Keynes was a Marxist communist as well. He understood. There's a word in your dictionary called repudiate. How are you going to end the debt, end the Federal Reserve? We probably won't get it done through legislation. Maybe Ron Paul will be successful because they're now talking about it. Ron Paul did get, I believe, a bill passed in the House to at least audit the Federal Reserve, but it never got through the Senate. So at least that's a good beginning, and Ron Paul's making it public all across the country as he's running for the presidency. So there's a way to do this. You do it simply. You just repudiate it. Look it up in your dictionary. It says to disown a debt. What does that mean? You just say, we're not paying it anymore. Wait a minute. All good nations should not do that, should pay their debts. But notice, this is called stealing, it's called lying, and its purpose is to destroy the capitalist system, and that's exactly what's happening in America today. We're being destroyed by a continuing process of inflation, just as John Maynard Keynes said. And by the way, notice one more thing. Here's the leading economist of the 20th century saying governments can inflate the money supply. No, that's not what I learned in my business classes at college. It's all caused by the people. No, John Maynard Keynes, the leading economist of the day, said you can do it through government increasing the money supply. And guess who? We have an agency in America that'll do that for you called the Federal Reserve System. Let me mention, there's a DVD you can watch on the internet called Abolish the Federal Reserve. It's 2 hours long, and it's free, no cost. You can do it and make your own copies. I encourage you to do that. And in there I showed a cartoon that appeared in 1934. 1934. What's 50, 60, 64 plus 12, 70 some years ago in the Chicago Tribune, and here it is. You say, well, what's this all about, Ralph? Well, I'm going to turn it around and talk about it, but I want you to know this is the cartoon we're going to talk about. In 1934, in the Chicago Tribune, there's in the lower right-hand corner, I guess the left-hand corner, there's a cartoon of a man sitting on a rock, and he's got a laptop, or at least a lapboard in his hands, and you can see he's got a pen to write it. So he wrote these words on the board, and it says, "Plan of Action for the United States." Now notice, just above his head, it says, "It worked in Russia." Now what worked in Russia? This plan for the United States worked in Russia. So we're now going to see that this is a communist plan to destroy America. Now who is this cartoon from? I can't say, but I believe it's, because the artist didn't identify it, but I believe that's Leon Trotsky. And you'll see on my DVD, I put a picture of Leon Trotsky, an actual photograph of him that looks almost like this cartoon character, the glasses, the beard, the unkempt hair, just like Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky was a Marxist communist. He was a member of what they call the Menshevik branch of the Communist Party. Lenin was representing the Bolshevik branch, which means majority. The Mensheviks were the minority, and so Trotsky lost Because Trotsky said the way to do this, as he's going to tell us, is step by step by step. And Lenin said, no, we're going to do it by violent revolution. By the way, that violent revolution killed as many as 40 million people. Oh, well, I never learned that in my college classes. It's a paradise. No, 40 million people didn't get to see it. Let's now read what Leon Trotsky suggested as a plan for America. He said, spend, spend, spend. Wait, is that what we're doing? Are we constantly increasing the size and scope of government to spend more money? Under the guise of recovery. Wait a minute. See, we got a recession, and the way to solve it is a bailout or more money to stimulate the economy. No, that's the problem. Spending money that's not been earned increases the money supply, which causes inflation. Then he said, bust the government. Wait a minute. Is that what Greece and other countries are revolting and rebelling because their government spending is going up and the people are upset because they're cutting out their entitlements? That's going to happen in America pretty soon if we're not cautious. Then he says, blame the capitalists for the failure. No, we just learned from John Maynard Keynes that governments are doing this, not the capitalist system. And then, what's the last one? I can't read it. Under the guise, or under the Constitution, abolish, that's right, abolish the Constitution, and then declare dictatorship. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the review of what's happening in America. Trotsky predicted what's happening in America. It's not just Obama, it's the whole Congress as well. Their solutions are just exactly what Trotsky advocated as a Menshevik. The way to destroy capitalism, according to him, was not through violent revolution. It was through the controlling of the money supply to, as Lenin called it, debauch the currency. And that's what's happening in America. And that's why I conclude the goal is to abolish the Federal Reserve. My name is Ralph Epperson, and Ed's asked me to make some comments today about me and my work, and especially about the Federal Reserve and why I want to abolish it. I'm a U of A graduate at the University of Arizona, and I graduated in many years ago. I won't tell you how many, but I graduated, and after college I went to Los Angeles for a job. First one after college, and I didn't know anything about California politics coming from Arizona, so I joined the Young Republicans. And then when I did, I was asked by a fellow young man that I met named Jim, and he said, why are you here? And I said, I'm here to learn more about California politics. And he said, no, you're not, you're here to read. And I said, no. And I'm so surprised that someone, if they took my book and translated it accurately into Chinese, they're going to tell their citizens that it was our government that did it to them. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, I've been researching and studying, and ever since that, it was in 1962, and so I've been very actively involved with selling books, doing lectures, talk shows, seminars, anything I can to get people educated. I'm a teacher. I taught part-time in Oregon, in a community college. And then I've been on the History Channel twice, on 2 documentaries that are still showing. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, one of them was showing again. So that's been helpful. I've been very pleased that I've been getting some sort of publicity out. I don't have any advertising budget, but just people want to, I hate to read. He gave me a book to read, and I read it. And my research into that field, what he called revisionist history, led me off for 40-some years now. In fact, just now 50 years I've been researching the conspiratorial view of history, which is revisionist history, which means we're being lied to. And that's what I've been doing for my life, adult life. I've got 4 books out on the market, all 2 of them have been published by I think it's 7 nations, primarily European, but the Chinese, there's a Chinese publisher in communist China publishing my book, The Unseen Hand, which I thought was very strange because in that book I tell the reader, anyone, that it was our government that turned China into a communist nation in 1985 and warned the American people that if we allowed the Federal Reserve to keep doing what it's doing, it's going to destroy the capitalist system. And now we're seeing that in America today.
Yeah, that's good. I'll make sure we got that in there.
Yeah, a couple of years ago I put out a DVD. In fact, I just, it's been uploaded onto the internet and you can go watch it for free. It's called Abolish the Federal Reserve. And you say, well, why do we do that? And that's what we need to talk about, because we've been warned. This is a flyer I've got on the subject that I hand out or I mail out in my catalog. We've been warned about this before by various presidents and bank officials, etc., that we need to not have a central bank like the Federal Reserve. Let me just read you the quote from President Franklin Roosevelt. He said, the real truth is that a financial element want to buy my books through word-of-mouth advertising, and that's what I've been doing for 50 years, educating as much as I can that there's something going on, not only in the United States, but in the world, and my goal is to try to educate people to get us together to stop it. I'm an author, a writer, and a researcher, and this was my first book. I wrote this in 1985, this book, called The Unseen Hand, in which I covered this in far more detail. There's several chapters on the Federal Reserve, on money, inflation, etc., and how Lenin is quoted, told us how to destroy the capitalist system. I would urge you to consider this. This is still being published. This is the year 2012. That's what, 15 plus 12, that's 27 years. The book's still being sold, still being, in fact, I just reprinted it a couple of months ago. You might want to consider this, because in here I defined this back in